Tonight, we travel back to a time when computers filled entire rooms, when the idea of a personal machine sitting on your desk seemed like science fiction, and when a quiet young man in California began building dreams out of wires and circuits. This is the story of Steve Wozniak, the gentle engineer whose hands crafted the devices that would change everything. In garages and bedrooms, under dim lamplight, and to the soft hum of electricity, he created a revolution without ever seeking fame. Before we journey through the quiet workshops and circuit boards of Silicon Valley together, if you're enjoying settling in for the night with a bit of tech history, consider hitting subscribe. And I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from right now? And what time is it there? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. A boy who loved wires. Let us begin in the year 1950, in the city of San Jose, California, nestled in the heart of what would one day become Silicon Valley. But in those days, the valley was still filled with orchards. Apricot trees and cherry blossoms stretched across the landscape. The air smelled of fruit and warm earth. It was here, on August 11th, that Stephen Gary Wozniak was born into a world that did not yet know how much it needed him. His father, Jerry Wozniak, was an engineer at Lockheed Martin, working on satellites and missile systems during the height of the Cold War. Every evening, he would come home carrying the quiet satisfaction of a man who solved problems for a living. And young Steve, even as a small child, would watch his father with wide and curious eyes. He wanted to understand. He wanted to know how things worked. Picture, if you will, a small boy sitting cross-legged on the floor of a modest California home. The carpet is worn and soft beneath him. Sunlight filters through thin curtains, casting golden rectangles across the room. In his hands, he holds a broken radio, its back panel removed to reveal a maze of wires, resistors, and capacitors. His fingers move slowly, carefully, tracing each connection like a detective following clues. He does not yet have the words for what he is doing. He only knows that it feels right. His father encouraged this curiosity. On weekends, they would sit together at the kitchen table, and Jerry would explain the basics of electronics. He would draw simple circuits on paper napkins, showing how electricity flows like water through a stream, always seeking the path of least resistance. He taught his son about transistors, those tiny switches that could control the flow of current, and Steve absorbed it all, his young mind expanding like a sponge in water. By the time he was 8 years old, Steve Wozniak had built his own intercom system, connecting his bedroom to those of his friends in the neighborhood. Imagine the delight of those children, speaking to each other through homemade devices, their voices crackling through wires strung between houses like secret telephone lines. It was magic, the kind of magic that comes from understanding how the world actually works. In school, Steve was different from the other children. He was shy, often preferring the company of circuit boards to the chaos of the playground. But he was not lonely. He had his projects, his experiments, his endless questions about electricity and logic. His teachers noticed his gifts early. In 4th grade, he was already studying electronics textbooks meant for high school students. By 6th grade, he had taught himself to read electrical schematics, those intricate blueprints that map out the nervous system of machines. There is something deeply peaceful about imagining this boy, this future pioneer of personal computing, sitting alone in his room late at night. The house is quiet. His parents are asleep. A single desk lamp casts a warm circle of light on his workspace. He is building something, always building something. His hands move with the careful precision of someone who has found their purpose. The solder melts and flows like liquid silver. The components click into place, and slowly, piece by piece, a new creation takes shape. This is where it all began. Not in a corporate boardroom, not in a university laboratory, but in the quiet spaces of childhood, where curiosity was the only fuel that mattered. Steve Wozniak biography entries often begin with Apple, with the famous garage, with the partnership that changed the world. But the real story starts here, with a boy and his wires, dreaming electric dreams in the California night. The education of an engineer. As Steve Wozniak grew older, his passion for electronics only deepened. High school brought new challenges and new opportunities to learn. At Homestead High School in Cupertino, he found himself surrounded by other bright young minds. Though few shared his particular obsession with circuits and code, he joined the electronics club naturally and quickly became its most dedicated member. Picture a high school electronics lab in the 1960s. The room smells of solder and heated plastic. Oscilloscopes line the walls, their green screens displaying the heartbeat of electrical signals. Bins of components sit on metal shelves, each labeled with cryptic codes that only the initiated understand. And there, hunched over a workbench, is teenage Steve Wozniak, already designing circuits that would impress professional engineers twice his age. It was during these years that Steve encountered his first real computer. The school had arranged a field trip to a local company that owned one of the massive mainframe machines of that era. These were not the personal computers we know today. They were enormous, filling entire rooms with their bulk. They required teams of technicians to operate. They cost more than most houses. But to Steve, standing in that air-conditioned room, listening to the hum and click of magnetic tape drives, it was love at first sight. He began to dream of building his own computer. Not a room-sized monster, but something smaller, something personal. It seemed impossible in those days. Computers were the tools of governments and corporations, not individuals. But Steve had learned from his father that impossible was often just another word for not yet. In 1968, he enrolled at the University of Colorado Boulder. For the first time, he was far from home, far from the familiar orchards of his valley. The Rocky Mountains rose in the distance, snow-capped and majestic. The campus buzzed with the energy of young minds discovering themselves. But Steve struggled with the social aspects of college life. He was homesick. He missed his projects, his workspace, the comfort of his California routine. He transferred to De Anza College, a community college closer to home, and then eventually to the University of California, Berkeley. But his formal education was always secondary to his true learning, which happened in stolen hours and weekend marathons of solitary experimentation. He would later joke that he learned more from building things than from any lecture hall. During this period, Steve developed a crucial skill that would serve him throughout his life. He learned to design circuits with an almost artistic economy. Where other engineers might use 50 components, Steve would find a way to accomplish the same task with 20. Where others saw complexity, he saw unnecessary waste. He became known for his elegant solutions, designs that were not just functional but beautiful in their simplicity. This relaxing tech documentary takes us back to those quiet nights of study and creation. Imagine Steve in a small apartment, textbooks spread across a second-hand desk, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten beside a cold cup of coffee. The television plays softly in the background, but he is not watching. His eyes are fixed on a circuit diagram of his own design. He is looking for ways to make it better, simpler, more efficient. Outside, the world continues its busy rotation. But in this small room, something important is taking shape. He also discovered a talent for pranks during these years, a mischievous streak that would become legendary. He built devices that would jam television signals, causing confused families to adjust their antennas in increasingly absurd ways, while Steve watched and giggled. He created a metronome that would tick at irregular intervals, slowly driving his roommates to distraction. These were harmless jokes, but they revealed something important about Steve Wozniak. He saw technology not just as a tool for work, but as a source of joy and playfulness, the blue box, and a fateful friendship. In 1971, a chance encounter would change Steve Wozniak's life forever. A friend showed him an article in Esquire magazine about a group of phone hackers known as phone freaks. These were people who had discovered ways to manipulate the telephone system, making free long-distance calls by generating specific tones that fooled the network. Steve was fascinated, not by the idea of free calls, but by the technical challenge. Could he build a device that would generate these tones with perfect accuracy? He immediately went to work, retreating to his favorite sanctuary of soldering irons and circuit boards. Within weeks, he had created what became known as a blue box, a small electronic device that could produce the exact frequencies needed to control telephone switching equipment. It was through this project that Steve met a younger student named Steve Jobs. Jobs was still in high school, attending the same Homestead High that Wozniak had graduated from a few years earlier. A mutual friend introduced them, knowing that Jobs shared an interest in electronics and entrepreneurship. The two Steves could not have been more different in temperament. Wozniak was shy, technical, more interested in building than selling. Jobs was charismatic, ambitious, always thinking about the business side of things. But somehow, they clicked. Picture their first meeting on a warm California evening. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They sit on the front lawn of a suburban home, the grass cool and slightly damp beneath them. Jobs is animated, talking quickly, his hands gesturing as he describes his vision for the future. Wozniak listens quietly, nodding occasionally, his mind already racing with technical possibilities. Neither of them knows it yet, but this friendship will reshape the world. Together, they began selling blue boxes to other students. Jobs handled the sales, knocking on dormitory doors with the confidence of a born salesman. Wozniak handled the engineering, continually improving the design, making the devices smaller and more reliable. They sold perhaps 200 units, making enough money to fund their next adventures. But more importantly, they discovered that they worked well together. Jobs had the vision. Wozniak had the skills. Together, they could do anything. This period of Apple computer history is often overlooked, but it was crucial. The Blue Box venture taught both Steves important lessons. They learned that there was a market for clever electronic devices. They learned that they could trust each other. And they learned that the combination of technical brilliance and business acumen was more powerful than either quality alone. The Blue Box itself was a small and unassuming device. Imagine holding it in your hand. It fits in your palm, a simple plastic case with a few buttons on the front. Inside, a carefully arranged circuit board hums with potential. Press a button and a pure tone emerges, a sound that can travel through wires and across continents, fooling the vast machinery of the telephone network. It is a tiny rebellion against the faceless corporations, a proof that two young men with soldering irons could outsmart billion-dollar systems. The birth of Apple. The early 1970s saw the rise of a peculiar gathering known as the Homebrew Computer Club. It met in a garage in Menlo Park, California, where engineers, hobbyists, and dreamers would gather to share their latest projects and discuss the future of computing. The air at these meetings was thick with excitement and possibility. These were people who believed that computers should not be locked away in corporate data centers. They believed that ordinary people should have access to this transformative technology. Steve Wozniak attended his first homebrew meeting in March of 1975. He walked into that garage carrying a notebook filled with circuit designs. He left carrying a vision that would consume the next several years of his life. He had seen a demonstration of the Altair 8800, one of the first microcomputers available to hobbyists. It was primitive by modern standards, little more than a box of blinking lights that required extensive programming knowledge to operate. But to Steve, it represented a beginning. He went home that night and could not sleep. His mind was racing with ideas. What if he could build a better computer? What if he could design a machine that ordinary people could actually use? What if he could combine a keyboard, a screen, and a processor into a single, integrated device? He began working immediately. Every spare moment was devoted to the project. He would come home from his day job at Hewlett-Packard, eat a quick dinner, and then retreat to his workbench. The hours would slip away unnoticed as he soldered, tested, revised, and soldered again. His girlfriend at the time grew accustomed to long evenings alone while Steve communed with his circuits. The machine that emerged from these labours was remarkable. Steve designed a computer that could connect to a regular television set, eliminating the need for expensive monitors. He included a keyboard interface so users could type commands instead of flipping switches. He wrote the software that would make it all work, a version of the programming language BASIC that he had adapted for his custom hardware. And he did all of this using fewer components than anyone thought possible, keeping costs down through sheer elegance of design. This sleep documentary now takes us to the moment of creation. Imagine Steve in his workspace, illuminated only by the glow of a desk lamp and the flickering light of a television screen. His fingers move across a keyboard, typing commands into the machine he has built with his own hands. The television displays green text on a black background. Each keystroke produces a character. Each command produces a response. It is working. Against all odds, his creation is working. He brought his computer to the next homebrew meeting, eager to share his achievement. The reaction was enthusiastic. Other members crowded around, asking questions, marveling at the elegant design. But it was Steve Jobs who saw the true potential. While Wozniak was happy to give away the schematics for free, Jobs recognized a business opportunity. He convinced his friend that they should build and sell these machines. On April 1st, 1976, Apple Computer Company was born. The name was Jobs' suggestion, inspired by a recent visit to an apple orchard. He thought it sounded friendly and approachable, nothing like the cold corporate names of IBM or Digital Equipment Corporation. Wozniak agreed, though he was more concerned with perfecting the technology than with marketing. They brought in a third partner, Ronald Wayne, who designed the first Apple logo and wrote the partnership agreement. Wayne would sell his stake just 12 days later for $800, a decision that would become one of the most expensive mistakes in business history. The company operated out of the Jobs family garage in Los Altos. Picture this legendary space on a warm spring morning. The garage door is open, letting in the California sunshine. A workbench runs along one wall, cluttered with oscilloscopes, soldering stations, and bins of electronic components. In the center of the room, Steve Wozniak is hunched over a circuit board, making final adjustments. Nearby, Steve Jobs is on the phone, negotiating with a local computer store for their first major order. The air smells of solder and ambition. Their first product, retroactively called the Apple I, was sold as a bare circuit board. Customers had to provide their own cases, power supplies, and keyboards. It was a product for hobbyists, for people who did not mind doing some assembly themselves. The price was $666.66, a number that Wozniak liked because of its repeating pattern. They sold about 200 units, enough to prove that there was a market for their creation, the machine that changed everything. But Steve Wozniak was not satisfied. The Apple I had been a proof of concept, a demonstration of what was possible. Now he wanted to build something truly revolutionary. He wanted to create a computer that anyone could use, not just engineers and hobbyists. He wanted to build the Apple II. The design process consumed him completely. He worked 18-hour days, forgetting to eat, forgetting to sleep, lost in a world of circuits and code. He designed a color graphics system that could display images on a standard television. He created a way to generate sound adding another dimension to the user experience. He invented a disk drive controller that used far fewer chips than competing designs, keeping the cost down while maintaining performance. Every aspect of the machine bore his fingerprints, his elegant approach to engineering. The Apple II was introduced in April of 1977 at the West Coast Computer Fair in San Francisco. Picture the convention hall on that spring day. Booths fill the vast space, each displaying the latest in personal computing technology. The air buzzes with conversation and the hum of cooling fans. But one booth draws more attention than any other. At the Apple display, a friendly-looking computer sits on a table, its beige plastic case smooth and inviting. A crowd gathers to watch demonstrations. What they saw amazed them. Here was a computer that looked like it belonged in a home, not a laboratory. It had a built-in keyboard, a color display, and a case designed by a professional industrial designer. It was friendly, it was approachable. It was everything that computers had never been before. The Apple II became one of the most successful personal computers ever made. It found its way into homes, schools, and small businesses across America and around the world. People used it to balance their checkbooks, to write letters, to play games, to learn programming. It transformed computing from an obscure hobby into a mainstream activity, and at the heart of it all was Steve Wozniak's brilliant design. This relaxing history documentary pauses here to appreciate the magnitude of what had been achieved. A quiet engineer from San Jose had built a machine that would change the course of human history. Working in garages and bedrooms, using skills developed over a lifetime of tinkering, he had democratized computing. He had taken technology out of the hands of corporations and governments and placed it in the hands of ordinary people. The years that followed were a whirlwind of growth and success. Apple went public in December of 1980, creating more millionaires in a single day than any company in history up to that point. Steve Wozniak's shares made him enormously wealthy, though he never seemed particularly interested in the money. He continued to focus on engineering, on solving problems, on building things. But success brought complications. The company grew rapidly, hiring new employees, moving into larger offices, becoming more corporate with each passing month. Steve Wozniak found himself increasingly uncomfortable with the bureaucracy and politics. He missed the simple days of the garage, when it was just him and his soldering iron and an impossible dream. The crash and transformation. In February of 1981, Steve Wozniak's life took an unexpected turn. He was piloting his single-engine Beechcraft Bonanza, attempting to take off from Sky Park Airport in Scotts Valley, California. The plane failed to gain altitude. It crashed at the end of the runway, tumbling across the ground before coming to rest in a crumpled heap. Steve survived, but the injuries were severe. He suffered multiple facial lacerations and, most significantly, a head trauma that would affect his memory for years to come. He developed a condition called anterograde amnesia, which made it difficult for him to form new memories. For weeks afterward, he could not remember the accident itself, or much of what had happened in the preceding months. Picture him in those difficult days, lying in a hospital bed surrounded by monitoring equipment. The room is quiet, except for the soft beeping of machines. Sunlight filters through partially closed blinds, casting striped shadows across white sheets. His face is bandaged. His mind is foggy. Friends and family come to visit, and he struggles to remember who they are or why they are crying. But Steve Wozniak was not someone who gave up easily. Slowly, painstakingly, he worked to recover. He found that playing computer games helped stimulate his memory. He spent hours with his Apple II, not as an engineer this time, but as a patient using technology to heal. The irony was not lost on him. The machine he had created was now helping to recreate him. He took a leave of absence from Apple, focusing entirely on his recovery. He returned to UC Berkeley under a false name, Robert Clark, to complete his undergraduate degree. He had left school years earlier to focus on Apple, and now, with time to reflect, he wanted to finish what he had started. He graduated in 1986 with a degree in electrical engineering and computer science. During this period, he also organized and funded a series of music festivals called the US Festival. These massive events brought together some of the biggest names in rock music, from Fleetwood Mac to Van Halen to U2. They were money-losing ventures that cost Wozniak millions of dollars. But that was never the point. He wanted to bring people together, to use his wealth to create experiences that would bring joy to hundreds of thousands. This approach to life, giving generously without counting the cost, would become a hallmark of Steve Wozniak's character. He was never motivated by money or fame. He was motivated by curiosity, by the joy of creation, by a genuine love for his fellow human beings. The Silicon Valley pioneers who followed in his footsteps often forgot these values in their pursuit of billion-dollar valuations, but Wozniak never forgot. When he returned to Apple, things had changed. The company was larger, more complex, and increasingly dominated by the forceful personality of Steve Jobs. New products were being developed, including a revolutionary machine called the Macintosh. But Wozniak found himself marginalized, his engineering input less valued in a company that had grown beyond the garage. Life after Apple. In February of 1987, Steve Wozniak made a quiet decision. He resigned from Apple Computer, the company he had co-founded, the company that had changed his life. He sold most of his stock and walked away, though he would always retain a small stake and his status as an employee on the company's books. But this was not an ending. It was a beginning. Free from corporate obligations, Steve could finally focus on what mattered most to him. And what mattered most was education. He had always believed that technology should be used to help people learn, to open doors that had previously been closed, to democratize knowledge the way the Apple II had democratized computing. He became involved with local schools in the Los Gatos area, where he had settled with his family. He did not simply write checks, though he wrote many of those too. He actually taught classes, standing in front of fifth graders and showing them how computers worked. He brought equipment into classrooms. He stayed after hours to help students with their projects. He became the kind of teacher he wished he had encountered as a child. Picture Steve Wozniak in a suburban elementary school classroom. Small desks are arranged in neat rows. Construction paper artwork decorates the walls. A group of 10-year-olds watches with wide eyes as this gentle giant of a man demonstrates how electricity flows through a circuit. He speaks in simple terms, making complex ideas accessible. He encourages questions. He never makes anyone feel stupid for not understanding. This is teaching as an act of love. He founded several companies after leaving Apple, though none achieved the same level of success. CL9 developed the first universal remote control, a device that could operate multiple home electronic systems. Wheels of Zeus, often abbreviated as WOZ, created GPS technology for tracking valuable items. Aquacore Technology was an investment company focused on technology acquisitions. These ventures kept him busy, kept him engaged, kept him connected to the world of innovation he loved. But his true legacy was not in any company he founded. It was in the countless students he taught, the teachers he supported, the educational programs he funded. He gave away tens of millions of dollars to schools and technology education initiatives. He adopted several schools, providing them with equipment, training, and ongoing support. He believed that every child deserved access to technology, regardless of their family's income or their neighborhood's zip code. This Steve Wozniak biography would be incomplete without mentioning his enduring love of play. Even as he aged, he never lost his sense of wonder, his delight in clever pranks, his joy in simple pleasures. He became famous for carrying around sheets of $2 bills that he had purchased from the Treasury Department and had bound into pads. He would tear off bills to pay for things, delighting in the confused reactions of cashiers who had never seen currency in this form. He took up Segway polo, playing the sport on the self-balancing scooters with the enthusiasm of a teenager discovering a new hobby. He attended conventions and technology conferences, always making time to speak with young engineers and aspiring inventors. He remained accessible in a way that many tech celebrities did not, answering emails from strangers, posing for photos with fans, sharing stories from the early days of Apple. The quiet revolutionary. As the years passed, Steve Wozniak became something rare in Silicon Valley. He became an elder statesman, a living connection to the origins of the personal computer revolution. Young entrepreneurs would seek him out, hoping for advice, hoping for investment, hoping simply to shake the hand of someone who had shaped their world. He was generous with his time and his wisdom. He would tell them stories of the garage, of the homebrew computer club, of the early days when everything seemed possible because nobody had told them it was impossible. He would encourage them to focus on what they loved, not on what would make them rich. He would remind them that the best innovations come from genuine passion, not market research. In the 2010s and 2020s, a new generation discovered Steve Wozniak through documentaries and books about Apple's origins. The Steve Jobs movie in 2015 brought renewed attention to the partnership that had started the revolution. Aaron Sorkin's screenplay depicted Wozniak as the heart of Apple, the conscience who reminded Jobs of the human cost of his relentless ambition. The portrayal resonated because it captured something true about the two Steves and their very different approaches to life. Wozniak continued to speak publicly about technology and its impact on society. He expressed concern about privacy in the digital age, warning that the devices he had helped create were being used to track and monitor people in ways he had never intended. He advocated for right-to-repair legislation, believing that people should have the ability to fix the devices they own. He pushed back against the closed ecosystems that had come to dominate the tech industry, remembering the open spirit of the homebrew days. These ancient folklore tales of Silicon Valley's origins have been told many times, but Steve Wozniak's version was always the most honest. He never claimed more credit than he deserved. He never minimized the contributions of others. He spoke plainly about both the triumphs and the mistakes, the friendships and the conflicts, the dreams that came true and the ones that slipped away. In his personal life, he found stability and happiness. After 3 earlier marriages, he wed Janet Hill in 1990. They remained together, building a quiet life away from the spotlight. He became a beloved figure in his community, known for his generosity, his approachability, his genuine kindness. He was the tech billionaire who would stop to help a stranger change a flat tire, the famous inventor who would spend an hour explaining circuits to a curious child, a legacy written in silicon. Today, Steve Wozniak remains an icon of the technology world. His contributions are visible every time someone picks up a smartphone, opens a laptop, or sits down at a desktop computer. The personal computing revolution he helped ignite has transformed every aspect of modern life, from how we work, to how we communicate, to how we entertain ourselves. But perhaps his greatest legacy is not technological at all. It is the example he set of how to live a good life in a world obsessed with wealth and status. He showed that success does not require ruthlessness. He demonstrated that genius can coexist with generosity. He proved that the quiet ones, the shy ones, the ones who would rather build than talk, can change the world. In January of 2026, just days ago as this documentary is being written, Steve Wozniak received the James C. Morgan Global Humanitarian Award from the Tech Interactive in San Jose. The ceremony took place in the city where he was born, not far from the orchards that have long since given way to technology campuses. Friends and admirers gathered to honor not just what he built, but who he is. Think of him now, this gentle genius who shaped our world. He is 75 years old, his hair white, his smile still quick and genuine. He still attends technology conferences. He still answers emails from strangers. He still believes in the power of education to transform lives. He still carries those $2 bills in his pocket, ready to brighten someone's day with a small act of whimsy. The story of Steve Wozniak is, in many ways, a story of hope. It tells us that individuals matter, that passion matters, that the quiet work done alone in bedrooms and garages can ripple outward and change everything. It reminds us that technology is not an end in itself, but a tool for human connection and human flourishing. As you drift towards sleep tonight, carry with you this image. A boy sits in a California bedroom, wires and components spread before him, building something that does not yet have a name. He does not know that his creations will one day be in the hands of billions. He does not know that his quiet revolution will reshape human civilization. He knows only the joy of creation, the satisfaction of a circuit that works, the peace that comes from doing what you love. And that, perhaps, is the truest lesson of Steve Wozniak's life. Do what you love, be generous with what you have, stay curious, stay playful, stay humble. The revolution will take care of itself. The night is quiet now. The story is told. Let the soft hum of distant machines carry you toward rest, knowing that somewhere, someone like that boy in California is building something new, something wonderful, something that will change everything once again. Sleep well, dreamer. Tomorrow holds its own possibilities.